Welcome, I'm Rachel Maddow. Tonight, we begin with a story unfolding inside Russia that's raising urgent questions far beyond the battlefield. Reports that 9 prisoners attacked their guards and escaped into the forests of the Leningrad region have cast a sharp light on Russia's growing dependence on incarcerated people for wartime deployments. The incident comes as Vladimir Putin makes a very public show of meeting with the head of the Federal Penitentiary Service, an image meant to project control, yet one that underscores the strain on Russia's institutions as the pressures of prolonged conflict increasingly spill into domestic life. A narrative struggling to hold. A country's wartime narrative relies heavily on portraying unity, resilience, and shared purpose. But when individuals who once embodied patriotic symbolism begin to question national decisions, the narrative becomes harder to sustain. The case of 83-year-old Lyudmila Vassilieva, a woman who lived through the siege of Leningrad and spent her life in St. Petersburg, resonated strongly for this reason. Her reported arrest during an anti-war demonstration created a moment of contradiction within Russia's public discourse. Figures who lived through the country's most difficult historical chapters often occupy a moral authority in national memory, and when such individuals express dissent, their voices reverberate more deeply. The incident underscored how the conflict has affected not only military families or activists, but also people who traditionally represented continuity and national endurance. Rather than fueling patriotic support, this moment highlighted the layered personal and generational tensions now influencing public attitudes toward the war. The strain of forced recruitment. As the war has continued, Russia's recruitment strategies have expanded and adapted, with reports of voluntary enlistment declining and more emphasis being placed on incentivized or compulsory service. Observers and human rights groups have documented increasing pressure on detainees to sign military contracts, sometimes under circumstances that raise legal and ethical questions. Some accounts describe prisoners being offered reduced sentences or threatened with new charges, creating an environment where consent is difficult to evaluate clearly. Ukrainian intelligence agencies have also claimed that forced sentencing and coercive practices have increased during 2025, though these claims cannot be independently verified. Such developments raise concerns about due process and the rights of incarcerated individuals, especially in a high-risk context like armed conflict. The difficult choices faced by prisoners remain incarcerated, enter combat, or attempt escape illustrate the profound desperation produced by prolonged war. These issues not only test the humanitarian boundaries of wartime recruitment, but also expose vulnerabilities within the country's correctional and legal systems. When human limitations meet military necessity, another troubling dimension of the manpower debate involves allegations that individuals with significant health or psychological challenges have been mobilized despite questionable fitness for service. Reporting from outlets such as The Telegraph has drawn attention to cases in which men with cognitive or developmental disabilities were reportedly classified as suitable for combat roles. These stories, shared by families and local communities, raise concerns about oversight within military medical commissions and the criteria used to evaluate recruits under wartime pressures. While wartime mobilization often expands eligibility, the deployment of individuals who lack the capacity to operate safely within combat environments poses serious ethical, operational, and humanitarian issues. Military analysts argue that such practices, if systemic, risk undermining unit effectiveness and could lead to preventable casualties. These reports also deepen public unease, highlighting a moral dimension to the conflict that goes beyond strategy and territory, a question of how a state values and protects its most vulnerable citizens. A medical system under pressure. Modern warfare typically depends on rapid medical response systems capable of stabilizing wounded soldiers and transporting them safely through multiple layers of care. However, analysts monitoring casualty patterns in Russia's forces have expressed concern that medical evacuation and frontline care infrastructure may be insufficient for the scale of ongoing operations. Reports indicate that evacuation delays, shortages of field medical units, and limited access to proper equipment have led to higher mortality rates among the wounded compared to peacetime expectations. While exact casualty data is extremely difficult to verify during wartime, humanitarian organizations and military observers agree that robust medical chains are essential for reducing fatalities and maintaining morale. When soldiers believe that medical care may not reach them in time, the psychological impact can be severe. These deficiencies point to broader logistical challenges within Russia's military planning challenges that can erode effectiveness and amplify losses even without major changes on the battlefield. The symbolism of the cemeteries, images circulating from cemeteries near major Russian cities, have become symbolic touchpoints for public discussion about the war's toll. In places like Novaya Tbilisi near Moscow, visibly expanding burial rows have drawn quiet but intense attention from families and independent observers. Some reports describe graves settling into soft soil or swampy ground, creating heartbreaking scenes for relatives visiting the resting places of loved ones. Whether due to rushed construction, difficult terrain, or general strain on local infrastructure, these images have become a metaphor for the emotional and logistical weight of prolonged conflict. They stand at odds with official narratives, emphasizing resilience and success, instead presenting a silent counter-narrative, expressed not through words, but through the tangible aftermath of loss. For many Russians, these cemeteries are the most intimate and painful connection to the war, and a reminder that public messaging cannot fully conceal the human consequences unfolding in communities across the country. Foreign fighters and expanding recruitment. As Russia's manpower needs have grown, reports have emerged of foreign nationals from countries such as Nepal, India, and various parts of Africa and Central Asia joining the Russian military under contractual arrangements. According to research from organizations such as the Atlantic Council, some of these recruits are promised support roles or economic opportunities, but may ultimately find themselves deployed to active combat zones. Russia's legal framework offers expedited residency or citizenship to foreign service members, a policy that some analysts argue may unintentionally attract individuals who are vulnerable to exploitation or who lack full understanding of the risks involved. While the recruitment of foreign fighters is not unique to Russia, many nations use similar methods. The scale and context of this practice during an ongoing high-intensity conflict have prompted international debate. These developments raise questions about transparency, informed consent, and the broader consequences of drawing economically precarious individuals into a heavily militarized environment. The social time bomb of returning veterans. Economists and sociologists within and outside Russia have warned that the eventual mass return of war veterans could create significant challenges for the country's social and economic stability. Russian economist Igor Lipsitz has referred to this phenomenon as a potential social time bomb, not because of any intent on the part of veterans, but because the mismatch between wartime expectations and post-war reality can create widespread frustration. Soldiers who earned higher pay during deployment may face dramatically lower wages upon returning to civilian life, especially in an already strained economy. Additionally, psychological trauma common among combat veterans worldwide can lead to difficulties reintegrating, mental health struggles, and increased need for social services. If resources for veterans are limited or inconsistent, social tensions may rise. The Russian police force is reportedly experiencing staffing shortages, which may compound challenges in managing public order and providing adequate support systems. Historical precedents from the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan to global post-conflict reintegration examples suggest that societies must plan carefully for the reintegration of large numbers of returning soldiers. Without such planning, resentment, unemployment, and untreated trauma can fuel instability. Isolation as solution, a controversial proposal. Among the proposals floated for post-war veteran reintegration is a plan to offer land and financial incentives for resettlement in Siberia. While framed by officials as a form of reward and opportunity, critics warn that such a policy could feel like isolation or marginalization to those who served. The historical echoes are troubling for some observers. Relocation of large groups to remote regions has complex and sometimes painful associations in Russian history. Local communities in potential resettlement areas may also resist the sudden influx of large veteran populations due to concerns about employment, resources, or integration difficulties. If implemented without sensitivity and robust support systems, this approach could intensify feelings of neglect among veterans and strain regional relations. The proposal highlights a broader dilemma: how to reintegrate combatants in a way that respects their service, addresses their needs, and prevents social fractures, an especially difficult task for a country already navigating political and economic stress. A leadership promise under strain. For more than 2 decades, Vladimir Putin's leadership narrative rested on 3 central themes: stability, safety, and national revival. The war in Ukraine was initially framed as an extension of these goals, promising greater security and geopolitical strength. Yet the prolonged conflict, rising casualties, economic strain, and visible domestic tensions have challenged this promise from multiple directions. International sanctions, recruitment controversies, emotional fatigue, and the erosion of public trust are all contributing to a sense that the original vision of stability is increasingly hard to maintain. Whether framed as governance strain, ideological fragmentation, or simple exhaustion, the pressure on the Kremlin is evident. Russia now faces not only the battlefield, but also the internal effects of a long, grinding war, economic challenges, societal divisions, and a public increasingly aware of the conflict's costs. The ultimate consequences for Putin's political future remain uncertain, yet the signs of stress are unmistakable.